I've just spent the last few minutes trying to work out how I say it. I think it's Qlippoth. Correct me in the comments. I'm going to stick with Qlippoth. These are the corruptions of the 10 Sephiroth, which I shall now pull up on the screen here. Now, I'm not going to go through what each of these means. I've got other videos on my channel which you can find. So we're just going to look now at a very, very simplified understanding of how we can work with the Qlippothic forces that emanate from the Sephira. Oh, it's all going to get very mystical and nonsensical and probably trigger some disagreement in the comment section. Some things we have to bear in mind. Now, my background is from the Western Hermetic tradition in Qabalah, which was largely filtered through medieval alchemy and Christianity, and then later on with the things like Eliphas Levi, and then the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley, and all those people inspired by that. It then becomes a magical tradition. I know that if I were to pop over to Israel and go and meet some of the long-haired Kabbalists over there, the true Jewish mystics, we would probably have absolutely nothing in common whatsoever. And if we were to try and discuss and debate what we do with Qabalah, they would probably be unrecognizable to each other. Now, within the Western tradition, there are differences as well. You're going to get different magical traditions, different attributions that get made, and then you've got different systems altogether. And henceforth, we now have a problem, because are we all talking about the same thing, or are we just inspired from very similar sources? I don't want to get into the narcissism of small differences. You know, like the Protestants and Catholics throw rocks at each other. They're doing exactly the same thing apart from just a few little differences. That kind of shit. Not going to do that. So just bear with me on this. I'm going to oversimplify this and put it into a more psychological, personal development frame. Oh, how cringeworthy. So soon there's going to be Kabbalistic therapy. I shall look it up, actually. It might already exist. Now, what are the Qlippoth? These are the demons, the negative energies associated with the Sephiroth. They are basically the Sephiroth inverted. What is the opposite thereof? Herein lies some of the challenges in trying to comprehend this. Bear in mind, I'm doing a very oversimplified version here. So, for example, in Malkuth, we have attributed Lilith. Now, if you actually look up the story of Lilith and then go, okay, so what does Malkuth represent? So that's manifestation. It is the perfected form and the end form of the manifest divine into the physical space and all that comes good from that. And what is Lilith? Well, Lilith is the screech owl night demon, got banished from the Garden of Eden, and then basically goes and eats children and murders people. And then adopted by the Wiccans later on as a fine symbol of feminism. Questionable. So how would we attribute Lilith there? Well, there are reasons why Lilith would be attributed. And you also have to look at who makes the attribution. Because sometimes there are variances, as I say, in different traditions. But Lilith was there in some of these stories, not in the biblical stories, but in some of the more Jewish folklore type scenarios, where essentially what we have is Lilith is the imperfect being in the Garden of Eden, which was the manifest perfection of the divine. So God creates the universe in 7 days, and part of that is the Garden of Eden, in which he puts Adam and Eve, and then Lilith for some reason, or it was just Adam and Lilith, who knows. And that's perfection. This is part of God's plan. But Lilith wouldn't go along with the plan. Gets kicked out. Off you go, screeching into the night, off to go and eat babies forevermore in folklore. So Lilith was basically present within the perfection and was a corruption of it. Which is all well and good. However, if we just scroll that story on a little bit, we now have Eve tempting Adam with the apple, and they get kicked out and all. So there's a degree of editing that goes on and in terms of the attributions. Now, when we look into the other symbolic Jewish attributions as well, you're going to find other reasons why some of the attributions line up, but of course there's plenty of stuff that doesn't. Here's how I think about it, and I would encourage people who are just starting out to think about this as well. You can put your own attributions in there. It's risky because you can completely mislead yourself into complete sets of misunderstandings. However, it's a good place to start to get a comprehension of the overall system before you then return to a much more detailed study. So now, what are these corrupted forms? What are these demons, these negativistic energies, the inverted Sephiroth, whatever you want to call them? What are they? They're essentially what happens when virtues go bad. So The 10 Sephiroth, when we apply to the human psyche, are largely 10 virtues, if I want to simplify it down as much as I possibly could. These are 10 awesome qualities that we should aspire to. Now, there's a term that's been invented recently, and I would recommend you look into this. It's called the purity spiral, or the virtue purity spiral. And this is when people are largely competing with their in-group about who is the most virtuous. And so in order to be accepted by the group, what people end up doing is pushing the boundary more and more and more and more. And that's how extremist groups emerge. Because within, say, Christianity, we would have, over the course of Christianity, last 2,000 years, we've had all sorts of extreme groups emerge that have basically been horrible and absolutely devastating to human development, but also to their communities and largely to minorities, women, and the disenfranchised within those communities who are essentially tortured absolutely horrifically and murdered. Why? Because they're acting from virtue. So a degree of virtue is always good. For example, the biblical injunctive from Christ to turn the other cheek. If a man strikes you on, what do? You turn the other cheek. If he takes a shirt from your back, you give him what? I can't remember the exact quotes. Comment section below. Now, these are all very noble. We only have to look at, say, Twitter and various other social medias that are full of videos of people misbehaving in public, people filming it, laughing and jeering along, or antagonizing it further. They're not doing anything to try and de-escalate it. They're actually enjoying the chaos, enjoying the awfulness. So were we to teach people the capacity to de-escalate and turn the other cheek, we could create a much more peaceful society. That's a virtue, and probably a very good one. But now, when does virtue become cowardice, indifference, and an excuse to be selfish? I'm not getting involved in other people's business, so I walk on by the person who's in distress. I'm not getting involved in other people's business. I'm a pacifist, so I walk on by the person being assaulted. We're all pacifists. We don't believe in violence, as we sit back as the country gets invaded by tyranny, and so forth. So the question here is, in what balance do we keep these things? Strength. If we go to, say, Givora, and we're looking at might and strength and all the sort of the martial related things, these are very good things to have. It's very easy to negotiate for peace when you have the capacity to destroy the enemy outright. That gives you an advantage to sue for peace. But within societies and communities, you have those that their might initially, we see this with dictatorships, bring about some stability and radical change to improve things for the underclasses and the oppressed. And very quickly that turns into tyranny and itself becomes a system of oppression. So these virtues can all tilt over into something else. These are things we don't like to look at in ourselves. So the people who are acting in tyranny, that dictator thinks he's the best thing for that country. He's the best thing for his people. The person who is the active protester for pacifism against whatever aggressor, they're doing virtue. They're operating from a really good place. Now, the problem is when you have people who are so locked into the thing that is virtuous, they can't see the evil they perpetrate. Is it the road to hell is paved with good intentions? So this is largely how we then start to use the Qlippothic forces within the Sephiroth to pay very careful attention to the development to ourselves that we are bringing. We need to keep our own balance checks and measures with a degree of self-reflection. This doesn't tend to happen very often once people join mystical lodges and they work their way up the degrees and they work their way, through their initiations. Quite often what starts to happen is the ego takes over. They get their membership certificates, they can put them in the downstairs toilet or lining the wall of the stairway so everyone gets to see as they go up the stairs. They've got the increasing degrees, that kind of stuff. That's quite a common thing. They get their new regalia they can put on. They've got these badges and jewels and belts and aprons and all sorts of other highfalutin things. They sit in the east, they sit in the west. And of course, they earn respect and status as there's a churn of membership and new members are all coming in and they're completely new and naive. And now you have somebody who might have only been there a year or two who is now the expert and the most senior person. It's not an uncommon scenario. And what starts to happen is the materialness, the Qlippothic forces of Malkuth, those materialistic, worldly desires start to creep in. And that person now is in the grip of that and can't see it. They think they're running a lodge. They think they are keeping people in line and teaching them and so forth. They may not be, of course. The problem here is, how would they know? I could be doing that right now. Maybe I am, and wouldn't necessarily know. So within our development of virtue, we need to have a degree of self-introspection and review of the effect of us on others, but more importantly, the effect of us upon ourselves, our own sort of karmic, whatever you want to call it, and our own development. The mystical Kabbalistic world is full of egotistical, narcissistic, psychopathic, just crazy people. But they've produced stuff of quite good quality. I'm not going to name any names here, but I know some of you who know the orders in which I've been aligned with will know some of the personalities involved. Actually, their product, although there's accusations of plagiarism, is very, very good. Their videos, their lectures, they're very, very good. They do have a degree of knowledge. But just spend some time with them online, in their forums. Don't do that. Gets very nasty very quickly. Or in real life, and just look at these people's history of how utterly, utterly unpleasant they can be, and how quickly they turn on each other as well in their competition to be El Supremo. Of there can be only one within this lodge, that kind of nonsense. So these are sort of other ways that we can do checks and measures. We have to pay attention to, are we alienating those people? Are we separating ourselves? Basically, pay attention to reality. So as we try and ascend the ladder, we ascend the tree. Yeah, pay attention to reality and grounded in real life. Pay attention to that sort of stuff. So that's really the best overview I can give in terms of my understanding of how these things work. What I will do over the next, between now and Christmas, we'll start doing some videos about the different Qlippoth. I'll give you some sort of background to why they're attributed, what they actually are, and what they represent within the psyche, within us. And then what do we do with those? Say, you've got to accept, the number one thing really is we need to accept that we are faulted. We are faulted human beings. Now, we're not getting into that biblical, the sins of the father, and therefore you're born into sin. That's kind of a corruption in itself. But what we have is that we are products of our environment, and we fit in to our environment, we fit into our communities, or fight against it, which is in part is fitting in. But what we become is, we're blind to it. We're blind to what we are. And so many people do not believe that they are capable of being the bad side. They shun that aspect of their personality and rewrite everything as virtue. We all know the extreme angry person. They're always angry about everything. They don't know it. They have no insight into that. So essentially we have Gevora corrupted. We know the person who speaks they talk a good talk. They're an absolute coward. The person who likes to get in people's faces, they're quite obnoxious and rude. But when someone challenges them on their stuff, on their behavior, they immediately have recourse to being a victim. And they blurt out victimhood immediately and adopt that position. That's such a common thing. Those people don't have insight. If we're doing Kabbalistic development, Western magical development and so forth, we must have insight into those aspects of ourselves. People don't like it because we like to think of ourselves as the perfected person already. Anyway, we'll look into those into coming videos. Again, comment section below, any corrections, additions, any requests, stick them in there. I'll be interested to see what you have. Thank you.